Hello, beautiful people. How are you? We are on the other side of the eclipse window. I don't know how it was for you all, but man, that was one hell of a ride. Happy to be on the other side. Sometimes I take these things with a pinch of salt, but whenever it's kind of after the fact and you look back, you're like, yeah, that was actually really pretty damn intense. Today, I'm recording this on the equinox, and then there's really like this shift in the weather where I am, and the energetic line changes up our body. The current of energy switches. Instead of coming up the body, up the crown of the head and down the spine, it goes up the spine, over the crown, and then down at the front of the body, which is really about going more inwards. So it's a huge shift. It's a huge shift in this moment. And I find it actually to be one of the harder transitions because the days are getting shorter and darker, and we're going into a more internalized space, which is that's not the part that's hard, but it's a big shift for I think it's like the biggest obvious shift. You know, spring has a beautiful obvious shift, but it tends to be like expansive. You know, and our society isn't so good at going more inwards. So it's an interesting transition. I didn't have much sleep, so my words might not come out as eloquently, but I was tuning in just now about what do I want to speak about today. And, there's talk about kind of what is the future human? What is the evolution? And as I just closed my eyes and tuned in, I really saw kind of like the light body with the third eye really illuminated. And I don't, it's not like a place that's not something that I tend to see all the time. I'm not kind of a new agey person in that sense. I'm deeply spiritual, but very grounded. And so I don't go into kind of these, like, I'm going to put a crystal in my third eye and, meditate that my third eye is opening. So for me, when I get that kind of visual, it feels very like I asked, okay, what needs to come through in this conversation today? And I very clearly saw that. And so I kind of see an image and I grasp everything that is around that very quickly. So I'm going to try and transmit that today. And also talk about what we're moving into as the future human. What does that look like? What does that feel like? What are the things that we're letting go of? What are we kind of bringing back online? What does that transition look and feel like? And maybe some things that will kind of help us along the way. So it might be a mix of things today, but at the core of it, it's really looking at what are we moving into and towards. And in this equinox window, if you're listening to this on the week, even after the fact, it's really lovely to have that intention that we're shifting energies, we're going more inwards. It's a time of internal growth. It doesn't have to be out in the world. So really shifting into more, what are the seeds that you're planting within yourself? And first, probably really, how do you cultivate the soil before you even plant the seeds? So let's dive in and see where it takes us. This is Corinne Bloom, and you're listening to Raw Conversations. I don't know why I want to begin with this, but I was having an interesting conversation with my daughter this morning as I was driving her to school. And they can do projects. It's like project-based learning. And one of the projects that she said she wanted to do was what happens after we die, what happens in the afterlife. So obviously she has parents and people around her that, believe that we're not just this body, that we have a soul, that we can choose to reincarnate or, go anywhere else in the multiverses. Maybe there's a progression to that, but very, very open about all of these things. And so for her, she was saying, well, it's so obvious, it's so obvious. And I said, well, maybe to some it's not, maybe to some that's still kind of like a real radical idea. And she came back with something that was really interesting. She said, well, but how, if people don't believe that there's more after this life or that we don't reincarnate, how do you explain that we keep on, like, we've been here for thousands of years, if not like who knows how long, right? We've probably done this cycle many, many times over. She's like, where do they think all of us come from? And we keep on coming there, keep on being more babies, even if people die, right? So I just was like, that's a really brilliant point. Like, that's a really brilliant point. And we had a conversation around it, and I said, I think, for me, I just grew up with a kind of knowing, and I also grew up in a very kind of conscious environment, and, had a meditation practice from when I was 15, and went to, I didn't grow up Buddhist, and I'm not Buddhist now, but I went through a period in my 20s where I really was studying that a lot. And so for me, all of this stuff was just natural, just as it is to her. And I think I kind of came into this life with a certain remembrance of how things are, because I remember my birth. I remember being in the canal. I remember being in my mom's womb, all of these things. So, but I've talked a little bit about that in other episodes. But I think we're in a time, I feel and I see it, that we are in a time where people are questioning more. Who are we? What are we? Why are we here? What is the point? What is the meaning? What has meaning? What is greater than just I, right? How are we interconnected? And at the very beginning, at the very, not the beginning, at the very least, there's just, I think, an opening curiosity around just our existence. And that can open up, an infinite rabbit hole should one choose to go down. So I don't know why I felt like sharing that story. I just thought, that was such a beautiful kind of, when children speak, sometimes it's so pure, right? It's so pure. And I love it because it's not too conditioned or molded and sculpted. So there's something that's very innocent and pure about it. And I just love that perspective. So I guess just off the back of that, what I see, feel, sense, see in regards to the future human and what we're moving into. And as I've spoken about for a long time now, this, some people call it ascension, some people call it awakening. I like to call it remembering. We're just remembering who we are. And actually, an example that I gave my daughter, because I was saying, okay, you've grown up in an environment where that's very natural to you, right? That's a normal conversation. But I find it always very interesting. There's somebody that I kind of know. They're not like a super close friend, but it's somebody that I knew, that everything in their environment, their family, their friends, their culture, all atheists, right? And yet they kind of really had this belief that the soul exists and that there is reincarnation. And I thought they are a beautiful example of just the knowing, because that's what my daughter was saying. She's like, I just know it. I just feel it. It just makes sense to me. And I was like, yeah, that's how I felt as a child. And I didn't actually at that point in my childhood, my mom didn't necessarily have that consciousness until I was maybe, 4 or 5 or 6 or something like that. But I remember having, memories and thoughts that were very, you could call it philosophical or mystical or whatever, and enlightened in a way from kind of our normal Jane and Joe lives. And so there's just this knowing, and the knowing is what we're remembering. The gnosis is what we're remembering right now. And that's why I call it a remembering. It could be an awakening, sure, because we've been under this amnesia and we've forgotten who we are and what this is all about, and, why we're here on, planet Earth, the school of life, the school of hard knocks, right? And so this story of this person that I knew was just like a beautiful example of you can be in an environment where nothing supports that perspective whatsoever. So you could say it's not taught into you by parents or peers or teachers. Actually, the complete opposite, the antithesis, is more the overriding message. But they just had this feeling of like, no, this is what I feel. This is what I believe in. And it's people like that really show me, yeah, we're remembering. More and more people are remembering. Because when I was younger, I grew up in California. And so, that was a very kind of spiritual mecca, you could say, where the West and the East met. So it's very open in general, but I remember it was rare. It was rare. And if I traveled outside of California, it was super rare. I couldn't really share or speak on the level that I would want to, or that I was used to at home, you could say, because people still hadn't caught up. And even when I first moved to London, I remember, I was setting up this center and starting to do workshops and talks. And, in the beginning, it was still a little bit like new and a little taboo and all of these things. And then just over the years, it was amazing to see the common language. Now, everything kind of in society and what humans go into is that the pendulum can often swing. So when I say I'm not new age, is because I do feel like new age kind of can hijack things that are pure and then make it into a fad, or put dogma into it, or make it into some kind of a cult, or for me, whenever anything becomes kind of like tribalism, that's when I'm like, I step back from it. So ultimately, I think we're all a conduit. We're all a conduit. There's nobody that is more special than anybody else in that sense. There's just those that maybe remember more, and then they're here to remind the rest of us. So part of this future human, part of this remembering who we are, what it requires is this going inwards, this contemplation, this being. And I've been speaking about this for a while now, that we're really moving from this illusion of being human doings into coming back to our original template, which is a human being. There's a reason why it's called human being. Everything is birthed out of the void. And the void is this like alive stillness, is the best way that I can describe it. And that's what I feel when you really come into your being and you be in a state of being. I know that sounds funny. I'm getting all Dr. Seussy. It's still, but so very alive. And everything that we've been in this state of doing has just been ultimately a massive distraction from that state of being. And when we're in that state of being, we remember. And then when we remember, we become so incredibly powerful, right? Because all of a sudden the illusions become very clear, and they start to kind of crumble and fall away. And, kind of the gig is up, right? The game becomes very clear. And one thing that I really appreciated, I really like Richard Rudd, who is the founder of the Gene Keys. And I listened to a beautiful interview podcast that he did with Emilio Ortiz on the Just Tap In podcast. And it was his most recent one, because I think he's done another one some time ago. And one of the things that he said, so that Emilio asked him if all of the kind of the teachings and rituals and all of that were just to erase tomorrow, like just not exist, what would be the one teaching that you would remember and want to share? And earlier in the discussion, in the conversation, he talked about how this cycle of existence is not just our life, it's the cycle of existence starts with the Fool. And the Fool is, if you're familiar with the tarot, it's like the first card, basically. And so the Fool represents this kind of this innocence, right? You begin the cycle with innocence, and then you go through this whole journey and process, and you experience a little bit of everything, but everything is cyclical. So you always come back to the beginning, but this time with wisdom. And he said along that journey, the journey of the Fool, and there's also the element of the trickster in it, is you recognize the cosmic joke. You recognize that there's always a bit of a trickster energy in everything. And he said if you can tune into that and drop into that, and have that, like that humor, that laughter. Like he was saying, actually, he finds that comedians are really like enlightened beings on this planet, because it's like they can alchemize what people don't normally want to talk about, or, get into so much dispute over, and they can bring laughter to it, which is such a powerful alchemist, So how many times in your life have you just felt like you don't know if you want to laugh or cry? Like you're in this intense moment and like shit couldn't go get worse and you're like, "Oh my God, I don't know if I should cry or if I should just start laughing." That laughter, that part that wants to laugh is the part that remembers, "Oh, this is just a game." It's been set up for me to go through these kind of hurdles and these, I don't like the term so much, but this simulation, this experience, that's all life is. It's an experience that is teaching me something, that I'm growing and expanding my soul in the process of it. But it's so important to have the humor around it because it is just set up for us to grow. It's not set up for us to be punished, although my goodness, sometimes it can feel like life is punishing. And it can feel like God's source, divine, universe, consciousness can feel as if it's punishing, but that's, I think, a lot of indoctrination and false beliefs because we're never being punished. I'm always weary too when, if you listen to anyone that says, "Oh, when you leave this life and you have your life review and your guides say, 'Oh, you made mistakes and you did this wrong and you need to go back and learn it again.'" No, that is not a pure channel. That is absolutely not a pure channel because if you listen to anybody that's had a near-death experience, they say the other side is so unbelievably loving, compassionate, kind, understanding. You are your judge, for lack of a better term. In your life review, it's you that says, "You know what? I want to go back and learn this again. Or I want to learn this and I want to try that and I want to, quote unquote, do better." It's not do better because it's praise or punishment. It's not in that duality, but I want to experience that again. I want to give that a go again, or I want to give this a go instead, and I want to learn this. But nobody is saying, "Oh, you failed at that. You did that poorly. Like, you need to go back again. We're going to push you and force you in." No, you are a sovereign soul. You always get to choose. And, sometimes that's hard for the human because we go, "Well, fuck, I didn't choose this. Why would I have chosen this? This is like, some really uncomfortable shit that I'm going through. Why would my soul have chosen this?" And it's easier as we've been living in this paradigm of the victim and authority having, well, some person or organization or entity having power over us, authority over us, which has kept us in that victimization role and archetype. It's easier to blame something. It's easier to blame somebody else, something else, even God or divine source itself. "Oh, that's punishing me. That's done this." And I know people that get really triggered when you say something along those lines of, "God, we chose this." It's like, "Why? No, I can't accept that." And this is part of the inner contemplation and coming into being, is that we learn how, when we're in a state of being and things get to relax because we're not in the distraction and the frenetic energy of doing, we're not in this laser narrow focus, we're in this kind of very vast, expansive, receptive state. This is coming into the feminine, right? Okay, I'm going to receive my experience rather than try to penetrate it and make it happen. In the receptivity of the moment and the experience and the beingness of being you, not just you as the personality, but you as the essence, spirit, and soul. We learn how to allow and accept because we're expanding, because we're exhaling. Like, an analogy that comes into my mind is, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but for me as a dancer, I was constantly having, physical therapy or some kind of treatment because, you have injuries or you have tweaks and things that hurt in your body. And I actually just had it reminded me of this because I had a physio appointment a couple weeks ago for something that was hurting me. And he's like, "Okay, I'm gonna give you pressure and pain, for 10 seconds." And I'm very well equipped at being with pain because of being a dancer, and just being with it, really focused, concentrated, relaxing and breathing into the pain. And but I was kind of trained through that as being a dancer because you're constantly in physical pain. But a lot of people, especially nowadays in our hugely pain avoidant culture is we resist. People resist and go, no, 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 I don't want to feel it. And if you resist the pain, the pressure, it's going to hurt exponentially more, right? When you relax into something, this is why I often strip it back to, are we in a state of tension or are we in a state of relaxation? Because when we're in a state of relaxation, we allow. And when we allow, then we learn the art of accepting. And that doesn't mean apathy. It doesn't mean that, oh, I accept these terrible things and then it's not going to change. No, you can't change anything until you accept and allow, or allow and accept. And so coming into this state of being gives us the fertile ground to be able to learn these embodiments of acceptance. And then in that, we're able to remember, learn about these much more profound, deeper aspects of our design, of who we are as human and soul. And so I think, moving towards this future human, you could say, is requires us to go into more frequently states of being, states of contemplation, not analyzing. Contemplation is just like, I'm going to be with this and let's, sit, feel, think, observe, witness, experience, question, have a conversation with. These parts of us, have it with the universe, have it with God, source, divine, have it with your soul, have it with nature, have it with whatever comes into your field, you could say. But it is a conversation, but it's a conversation that is had telepathically through feeling, through the experience, through the sensation, through the energy, right? So I'm trying to remember how I went off onto this tip, onto this train of thought. I think the more that we do this, it's going to open up so much more information. Because it reminds me of both how the brain works. I know Alan Watts talked a lot about this, that the moment that you label something, you've limited it. So the moment that you say these are the colors of the spectrum, these are the colors of the rainbow, your mind fixates on that and it gets narrow. And then it's harder for it to be open to anything that is beyond that spectrum, when actually there's a very, very, very vast spectrum, way more that we can't even see. NDEers will say that on the other side, there are colors and there are sounds that you just couldn't even conceive of here. It's so beyond what we have here. And I remember in a plant medicine journey, I remember that seeing color that it's like, I've never seen this color before. It's amazing. And Darius Wright, who talks about and helps people achieve controlled out-of-body experiences, he says, we're seeing like 1% of the light spectrum. So there's so much more available to us. So why am I sharing all of this, and how does this tie into where we are right now? I think we're getting to the point where the old kind of simulation and construct and paradigm is getting really boring for people. And I think you might agree with me potentially if you find yourself like this eclipse window was, like I said, it was a hell of a ride. It was deeply uncomfortable. There was a lot coming up to let go, let go, let go. That was September energy. Let go, let go, let go. So things coming up from the past, patterns coming up that were like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to suffer this same pattern, behavior, cycle, loop again and again and again. Like, no, I am done with this. I want to evolve beyond that. And so, first we have to see it, right? We have to see it. We have to allow it. There's the acceptance of, okay, this has been my past. This has been my identity within that past pattern and behavior and belief system and structure and, all of that stuff. And now there is the sovereign choice of like, I let it go. I let it go. And so then you're coming back to that blank canvas that I've spoken about, that is your soul essence. What we paint on the canvas is our experience, our human experience, but we're coming back more to that clean slate, that tabula rasa moment where we can begin again, essentially. And that's, when we go through evolutionary shifts, that's essentially what we're doing is like, okay, strip back. There has to be the crumbling. There has to be like the removing of the plaster or the taking away of I think it was Michelangelo that if I got that right, excuse me if I didn't, but that said, that you could say this with the painting or with the sculpture. I think the sculpture is a better analogy because it's like it's always there. It's all the image is already there. You're just chipping away to expose the sculpture that is already in the stone. And so I think this is what we're doing. It's like, first we have to chip away at the stone that has been encasing us, you could say. And we're returning back to our original template that, came from a long, 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 long time ago. So I know that it can be deeply uncomfortable to sit with ourselves, but I do see that there is this theme that's coming up of people that are questioning or that they're curious or that they're like, God, there's got to be more to this than just this. And I don't want to be on this repeat. This isn't interesting to me anymore. And in the eclipse window, I had some really hard moments. And I had actually, it was 2 or 3 nights ago where I woke up in the night and I just was furious. I was furious at like my soul, at, God, source, divine, whatever you want to call it. I was furious and just being like, F you for, where I'm at in my life, and kind of feeling like I've been brought back to a point that I'm like, I don't want to be back here. And then also F you for all the suffering that I see my friends going through, or F you for all of the suffering that is going on in the world. And how are we still doing this crap again and again and again in this loop? And, more wars and more division and more segregation and more greed and the same thing that we've been doing. It's like, enough. We're not growing from this. Enough. But the thing is, things repeat until we see it, make it conscious, and then alchemize and let it go, right? So some people still can't see it. They still can't see the formula. They can't see the loop, whether it's something inside of them or on the world stage. And of course, everything that's happening outside of us is still a reflection of a part that is going on internally. So that's why, peace starts within, right? Change starts within. But I really had this like fed up moment. And so now on the other side of this eclipse window, it's like, okay, restart. But it means you got to shed the things, like let go of the metaphoric clothes that you're no longer going to wear. Let them go. Give them away. I think I shared that last week. I've given away so many bags of clothes that I'm like, yeah, it's not me anymore. So now is a really potent time to take more moments in your life, in your daily life, to come into stillness with yourself, come into contemplation, come into being, to ask the questions that you're curious about asking, and to explore that within your state of being, not through a logical, rational mind that needs to find, maybe you need to find the proof and you can go out and look for the science of it if that makes you feel better. But I would invite and encourage you to begin with, let your body and being and soul and essence tell you. What do you hear? And I think, I'm just reminded, the image came back into my mind of when I tuned in, of this like light being with the third eye really illuminated, is we're coming back into that remembrance. Some people saying the pineal gland is opening up again, which will then, uncalcify the third eye. And then once that's open, that's when we begin to see, and we see through the veil and we see through the illusion. And, that's a process, and that's like step by step. We don't have to get to that point right away, because also we're sensitive creatures, and sometimes, really reality augmenting experiences can be in a way traumatizing. I remember I did a podcast maybe 1.5 years ago about like the trauma of awakening. Sometimes there is a trauma to it because your entire reality, everything that you based your reality on, like all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, no, that's no longer. And so then it's like, shit, what's here then? And, sometimes I can get into kind of far out thinking, that it almost feels like your brain is going to break because you're like, whoa, the brain can't comprehend it because it's limited, and it's a tool. But if you really drop into the knowing and the remembering. You have everything. Richard Rudd was talking about this. Everything is contained not only in our DNA, but in the DNA of everything that has ever lived and existed on this planet and in the universe and in the multiverse. That is the breath of consciousness that breathes through everything that exists, and that holds memory. If you know the work of Veda Austin and her work with water, water holds all information. It remembers everything. It's remarkable. It's magical, And one thing that I want to share as it comes through that Richard Rudd talks about is when you have those moments of just absolute awe or bliss, that's when we come into timelessness. And that's when we come into the experience of infinity. Because that's one of those things that our brain cannot grasp. We cannot grasp the idea of, it's not even the idea, it's the isness of infinity, which is what we are and it's what we live in. But we live in a linear time construct and of space and time, or time and space. But when you have those moments, and it reminds me of when they say that we go into these kind of, I don't know if you ever saw the Pixar film, I just watched it a couple of weeks ago with my daughter, called Soul. And they're saying that you can access these kind of in-between realm, so it's beyond the veil, when you are in that state of flow, like as a musician, or if you're writing, or if you're doing a sport. Have you ever had that experience where you're in it and it's like timelessness, absolute timelessness, because you're in the flow of creativity, and it really brings you, well, firstly, it brings you more, on a technical term, it brings you more into a theta brainwave state. But in the film, they were saying that it literally, that's how you can access this realm of the soul, one of the dimensions of the realm of the soul. And it was so beautiful to see that, because it's like, yeah, when I'm writing, or when I'm speaking, or when I'm leading a workshop, or when I'm playing at the piano, or when I'm singing, or when I'm moving, it's like I go into another dimension, and you go into timelessness. Hours could pass, like especially when I'm singing, hours could pass and I wouldn't even know it. So all of this to just say that this is what we're tapping into more. We're getting out of the rigidity and the concrete kind of finite way of existing, because it's not working for us anymore. And we know that it's not working. Even if your mind can't conceive or make sense of it, you'll know, because you will feel fed up with the same repeating patterns, both personally and collectively and in the world, right? It's just, we're getting fed up with it. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing to be fed up with it, because it means then we're ready for the next level. We're ready for growth and evolution and expansion. So the invitation today is just to take more time, more moments, set the intention to be with yourself, to ask the questions that make you curious, and never ever forget the trickster, the fool that goes into it with innocence and that can come back around that loop and that cycle with wisdom, and that can learn to laugh at life, because sometimes, y'all, this shit, we take it way too seriously. And I put my hand up. I'll be the first one to put my hand up to go, yeah, sometimes I take it too seriously. And that's okay. That's part of the process too, Sometimes you're going to have a whole gamut of emotions in response to what's going on in your life. But I think if we can return to the humor, if we can return to the laughter, remember babies, they will giggle at you playing peekaboo for you could do it all day and they would still laugh, because they're in that pure state of timelessness, of infinity, of just bliss and euphoria and awe, where the littlest thing is it's hilarious. It's hysterical, right? So we need to remember that along the way. And I think, certainly in the moments that I have where I feel the most, I don't like the word enlightened, but I'll just use it for lack of a better term. I say I don't like it. It's more just because of the way that it's portrayed. But if I ever feel that I have moments of enlightenment where, yeah, God, I don't want to use that word because there will be so much projection onto that word. I'm not claiming to be enlightened by any shape or form, but what I mean is those moments of just purity where I can really feel myself in my being connected to source, my higher self, to all that is in the knowing of why we're here and what we're doing here. And this is very surreal and wow, what a trip. And it's like hyper reality, I like to call it. In those moments, there is just this, it's funny. It's funny. The whole thing is just like, wow, this is such a trip. And to remember that, like, yeah, it is kind of all a bit of a game. And those moments of laughter are so beautiful because they bring us into this really pure energy. And I think, when you look at beings that are more evolved, they laugh a lot. They really, really laugh a lot. So yeah, that'll be another invitation, is just remember to laugh, remember the cosmic joke, because sometimes it really is a cosmic joke. Again, I go back to the beginning of, you'll have moments where you're like, oh my God, this just couldn't get any worse. I don't know if I want to cry or if I want to laugh. In those moments, do both. Do both. Shed some tears and then laugh. Laugh it out, because, it is just kind of a game, right? And it's not to belittle it or to take away from our experience within it that can feel so real and so very serious. But simultaneously, we can feel both at the same time. We can feel multiple experiences and emotions and sensations in the same moment. But yeah, let's remember how to laugh. So with that said, yeah, good luck. Enjoy. Have fun. Be curious. Make mistakes. Do it again. We're all in this dance together. So, as always, take it or leave it as feels right for you, and loving you from afar. You've been listening to Raw Conversations with Corinne Bloom. Thanks so much for showing up, listening in, and being a part of the conversation with me.